Chinese President Xi Jinping welcomes French President Emmanuel Macron at the Great Hall of the People for a state visit. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. Chinese President Xi and French President Macron held lengthy bilateral talks on Thursday in Beijing. The two leaders pledged to deepen cooperation on trade, advance new development with China's Belt and Road Initiative, and reopen people-to-people and cultural exchanges. We begin our coverage with this report from Dong in Beijing.
Chinese President Xi Jinping said China and France could overcome differences and constraints to develop their relations. President Xi made the remarks during a bilateral meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron in Beijing. Xi said China and France, as major world powers, had the ability and responsibility to overcome their differences and safeguard world peace, adding that the two countries should adhere to the general direction of a China-France comprehensive strategic partnership that is stable, reciprocal, pioneering, and progressive, to practice true multilateralism and maintain world peace, stability, and prosperity. China and France have enjoyed a comprehensive strategic partnership for 9 years. Bilateral trade between the two countries exceeded 100 billion euros in 2022. China remains France's largest trading partner in Asia and is sixth largest globally, and France is China's third largest trading partner within the European Union. Specifically, cooperation on aerospace, agriculture, climate change, and biodiversity have grown steadily over the years.
It will give a very, strong response to the recent discussion within European countries that they should have less so-called dependency on Chinese markets.
President Macron, on the other hand, expressed a willingness to strengthen cooperation with China, especially in areas of climate change, food security, and people-to-people exchange. He appreciated China's role in resolving regional hotspot issues and called for deeper communication to strive for world peace. The two presidents then exchanged views on the Ukraine crisis, with President Xi reiterating China's position on promoting peace talks.
China is trying to have some more communication with all the leaders, including President Macron and also the leaders of European Union institutions. Just like President Xi mentioned that there will not be a simple answer to a complicated questions like Ukrainian crisis.
President Xi then reiterated to follow the United Nations Charter and to build a balanced, effective, and sustainable security framework in Europe. There has been wide-ranging consensus following the talks between President Macron and the Chinese leaders. Experts say this will have an impact on the future of diplomatic relations between China and France. They say it sends a positive signal on collaboration between the countries, as well as China and Europe, in promoting world peace and stability. Dong Xue, CGTN, Beijing.
For more now, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Garret Martin. He's a senior professorial lecturer with the School of International Service at American University. Also with us, Anton Fedyashin is a Russian affairs expert and professor of history at American University. From Beijing, Gong is a professor of economics at the University of International Business and Economics. And Huiyao Wang is the founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization in Beijing. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Huiyao Wang, let me start with you. So this is a 3-day visit by the French president to China, and it comes at a crucial time on the international political landscape. If we look at what's going on right now, of course, there's the conflict in Ukraine, which has caused many divisions around the world. There's economic headwinds, many countries in the grip of inflation right now, and there's also an energy crunch facing many countries around the world. So a key time, these two sides discussed trade, European relations, and the Ukraine conflict. From the Chinese perspective, what's the aim of this visit?
Well, I think this visit is very timely, is very, very significant, actually. And because we know that, there's so many things happen in the world, and then so many crises that's actually going on right now. And so it's high time that European leaders, French leaders that are coming to Beijing talk to the Chinese leaders. So this is a really very, successful visit, I could say, because it has a very comprehensive. It talked about not only bilateral relations, strengthening the restarted everything. It is also first time, I think, for China actually to receive two top leaders from Europe at the same time, and also President Xi gave President Macron a big welcoming ceremony at Tiananmen Square, and also there's quite a lot of activities going on, and also President Macron is spending more time in China this time than last time. Chancellor Xiao is going to also visit the Guangdong, the most developed, advanced area in China for opening up. So I think there's the key is now they actually talk a lot about the Ukraine-Russian war actually, and that is really very significant, and local recognize the value of China's peace position paper actually the point, but also I think they added more. I mean there's more points there, like they have to stop all the bombing and civilian attacks, and there's emphasized quite a lot of positions, and humanitarian should be aided, strengthened. And also, I think they hold a joint conference, news conference. That is also quite remarkable. Not very so often for leaders of China and foreign leaders holding joint news conference, which they did this time. So I think this is symbolize a complete recovery now from pandemic, and also shows China's determination to open up and to welcome, and also wants to see that European has its unique position. A G3 position actually, that Europe has its own autonomy and can have its own policy, and emphasize not decoupling, but of course de-risk. I mean, both sides needs to avoid risks, but not decouple. So those are really good points and things that we emphasize. So I think this has been very timely. The business community is very happy about that, and then I think it's also give a good example for China among so many top leaders visited China. This is really where to go, a way to go, that we have to strengthen cooperation and not seek conflict.
Garret, it's been a long time. Great to have you with us back on the show. Garret, there have been escalating tensions between China and the United States for a long time, and many European countries have followed the United States in imposing sanctions on China. In fact, Macron said Europe must resist reducing trade and diplomatic ties with China. So when we look at this visit, is the French leader playing something of the role of a bridge builder here?
Yes, I think that's one way of seeing it. I think it's keeping in line with Macron's approach to always wanting to keep channels of communications open. If we recall, in the months leading up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and infringing on Ukrainian sovereignty, Macron made a number of visits to Moscow to try and prevent the conflict from happening. So I think his desire to keep communication channels open has always been part of the DNA of Macron's diplomacy, and I think we're seeing that here. I think also there are sometimes differences of emphasis between the United States and some European countries when it comes to their policies towards China. And I think also fundamentally, a lot of the way that the European attitudes toward China in recent years has been very much affected by the way that China has been supportive of Russia. So I think this was an important test for Macron to see the extent to which China would be serious in trying to reach negotiations, to promote negotiations. So I think for Macron, this was important. The last visit, I believe, and the last face-to-face meeting was 4 years ago. So bridge building, restoring diplomatic channels of communication, I think was always going to be important, even if I assume the expectations of moving the needle for this visit were not high. And I think what we've seen so far seems to have confirmed that expectation.
Garret, one other point. Macron is accompanied on this visit by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Now, she's been very critical of China, and she cited, for instance, the imbalance in trade between China and the European Union. She's also warned China not to supply weapons to Russia in that conflict, although I should add that there's absolutely no evidence that China has intended to do anything like that. But what do you make of her role in this visit and why she's there?
I think it's twofold. I mean, I think one is it's important for, I think, the French president to showcase European unity. I think that's been an important element when it comes to the relations with China. If we recall, the last time that Macron had a face-to-face with Xi Jinping in 2019, he had also invited Angela Merkel at the time, the German chancellor, as well as Ursula von der Leyen's predecessor. So I think this element of showcasing European unity, I think, has always been important, and Macron had hoped to accompany Olaf Scholz when he came to Beijing. I think the second element, too, is that there are differences of emphasis. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen is the president of the Commission. She does not have a domestic public opinion to cater to in the way that Emmanuel Macron also has to. So there are sort of natural small differences of emphasis when it comes to European leaders. There are some differences of attitudes towards China, but I do think there has been a broader movement towards taking a more realistic or pragmatic attitudes towards China, especially when it comes to the area of economic security.
John Gong, France, or at least China, is France's largest trading partner in Asia, and President Xi once again during these meetings reiterated that China would like to advance that relationship. Where do you see the greatest potential for growth in the links between the two countries?
Well, the greatest potential of cooperation cannot be demonstrated better by Airbus' decision to basically expand its capacity in China to build another assembly line for building airplanes. I think this is I cannot think of a better example to illustrate this point that China's trade, being the second largest importer in the world, is taking a very fundamental shift here, a shift that's very much attributed to Washington's policy towards China. Airplanes is a big ticket item for Chinese imports. And in the past, that's been somewhat split between Boeing and Airbus. And I think from now on, given the political climate in Washington, given all the kinds of actions taken by Washington vis-a-vis China, I think there's going to be a fundamental change towards buying more airplanes from Europe. That's just one example. When it comes to importing of other products with high-tech components, I think we're going to see more of a fundamental change here. That while von der Leyen was talking about de-risking from China, China is also thinking about contemplating de-risking as well, I think. And I think, given a choice between Europe and the United States, it's pretty obvious to me that which part is a safer bet here. So I think it goes both ways. And I think there's going to be a huge potential of opportunities in business, in trade, investment. Just look at the size of the delegation, the French delegation Macron has brought up with him here, over 500 people. I mean, that's very significant. It's a clear sign that there's going to be more investment from European companies, particularly French companies here in China.
John, one other thing. That Airbus deal that you're talking about, so Airbus will supply up to 160 aircraft to China. Airbus will also open an assembly line in China. I was wondering, how significant is that kind of deal at a time when the United States is actually advising and encouraging its allies to reduce this type of relationship with China?
Well, Washington will do whatever it will do, and it can do whatever it can. But I think French is particularly different among the many countries in the European Union. French has its own independence element in its foreign policy. France is also a big player in European Union politics. France is also a victim of Americans' foreign policy. I'm talking about the AUKUS deal, the deal of supplying nuclear submarines to Australia by Great Britain and the United States, and at the same time ditching the deal signed previously between France and Australia. So certainly there's room for more cooperation, even on the political side, on the diplomatic side, between China and France, vis-a-vis the policies being adopted by Washington.
Right. Anton Fedyashin, of course, the Russia-Ukraine conflict was also discussed by the two leaders. President Macron said he hoped that China would use its influence to, quote, bring Russia to reason in ending the conflict. Of course, as we heard earlier on, China has already presented a 12-point peace plan to bring the conflict to an end. But what do you make of this appeal by President Macron to President Xi?
Well, I think the real meaning of bringing Russia to reason means to convince the Russians to capitulate, because the alternative, peace talks, is something that the Ukrainians have absolutely ruled out. And as a matter of fact, they passed a law last October, a presidential decree signed by Vladimir Zelensky that forbids anyone in Ukraine, including himself, from conducting talks with the Russians. I think we need to understand what's going on here sort of in a broader context, because for the countries of the world that have not joined the anti-Russian sanctions, that would be all of Latin America, all of Africa, and the overwhelming majority of Asia, except for Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. For them, the Ukraine crisis is a crisis that was triggered by NATO expansion. Now, the invasion by the Russians beginning in February, the majority of the world actually sees as a violent and definitely an unwelcome and an illegal move. But most countries see the Ukraine problem in terms of NATO expansion. So when Emmanuel Macron or Ursula von der Leyen or any member of or leader of a NATO country speaks of the Ukraine crisis, what the Chinese hear is, support the right of NATO to expand, and that would be okay, except that NATO has, over the past, 14 months, made increasingly vocal and public statements about strengthening its cooperation with Pacific countries, specifically Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Japan. And this is on NATO's website. Jens Stoltenberg, who was the General Secretary of NATO, has also gone public about this. Yeah. And I find it very hard to imagine that the Chinese would turn around all of a sudden, convince the Russians to sort of capitulate, essentially encourage NATO expansion right up to Russia's border, and at the same time expect NATO not to eventually sort of behave itself the same way in the Pacific. And I wonder if the Europeans, if one side of Europe, the NATO side, and the other side of Europe, its political leadership, is really whether these guys understand that they're talking at odds with each other.
Right, Anton, that's a sort of contradiction which might need a bit of explanation. I mean, we got President Macron who goes to China and asks President Xi to help bring this conflict to an end, but at the same time, France belongs to NATO, which has been pouring billions of dollars worth of military equipment into Ukraine. I mean, how does one explain that? It doesn't seem to make sense.
Well, one doesn't explain it because it's a sort of dual strategy where, the reality of the Ukraine crisis, the broader crisis that started in 2008 in the Bucharest summit with offer for Ukrainian membership in NATO, that's sort of forgotten, and all emphasis is laid on the February invasion of Ukraine, which is illegal, and the Ukrainians have every right to defend their territory. But this is either tone deafness or it's a complete disregard for the complexity of the crisis. And the Chinese are way too smart to not see what's going on here, which, by the way, is why the Chinese said all the right things about emphasizing peace and especially diplomacy. But when it came to European insistence on President Xi calling Kiev, the response was very terse and very direct, that will happen when the time is right. The implication being that the time is not right so far. So I, unfortunately for the Ukrainians, would not expect any major breakthroughs with Chinese participation, as long as Kiev is not ready to sit down at the negotiating table, and that's going to be a very tough negotiation, unfortunately.
Yeah, Garret, what are your thoughts on this seeming contradiction? I mean, Macron has called for the West to engage with China so that the globe doesn't split, as he put it, into warring factions. In fact, Reuters had a report in which it said that for its part, China is eager to ensure Europe does not follow what it sees as US-led efforts to contain its rise. I mean, could we see something of a cross-Atlantic split emerge, or is it something that Macron has talked about before? He's talked about a third way. There is a third way to handle this.
Well, I'll have to respectfully disagree with my colleague at American University. I think there's some elements here about the story about NATO and NATO's relationship with Russia, which I think are just plain wrong. I think, first of all, Russia has been opposed to NATO expansion, but not just on its borders. I mean, when Montenegro and North Macedonia joined NATO, there was Russian actions to try and prevent that from happening. My knowledge of geography is sufficient to know that neither North Macedonia nor Montenegro are on the borders of Russia. So I think we have to be careful. I mean, we can argue whether NATO expansion, the way it happened in the post-1991 period, was done appropriately. But I think there's still a plain fact that Russia has violated the sovereignty of another state. And there is a contradiction, I think, sometimes in terms of China has declared a commitment to protecting borders. And I think it has not been, sufficiently clear in condemning that action by Russia. So I think that also plays a part, in sort of the lack of trust that we see in European powers, or the change of attitudes towards China. I think have also been dictated by its attitude, which has been rather neutral in favor of Russia. So I think that's one first element. Are there differences of opinion between European powers and the United States on a variety of subjects? Of course. Their interests are different at times. Their geographical positions are different, and I think that should be expected. But I wouldn't overestimate. I think when we talk about even the European attitudes towards China, the needle has moved more towards the rivalry element. I think that for a variety of reasons.
Okay, let's move on. Huiyao, Wang, next year will mark the 60th anniversary of the diplomatic relationship between China and France. At these meetings, the two leaders pledged to continue high-level contacts. They want to focus on three mechanisms, as it's called: strategic, economic, and financial. Other important thing is people-to-people exchanges, sports relations. Where do you see that going?
Well, I think that this is a really a very successful visit, I would say, by the French president, and it has actually covered many ground. And as you mentioned, of course, business, commercial, and people-to-people exchanges, absolutely, is stressed. For example, next year will be the 60th anniversary of China. France diplomatic relations establishment, and also they're going to start the ChinaFrance tourism year, and then also we see that the China also will support French for having Olympics 2024, but also I see that French is also will participate in the Belt and Road Summit that has been mentioned as well.
Right.
So that's really quite remarkable, and also of course we see more. Tourism, student exchanges, and of course this business is expanding on both sides. So I see this as a really good opportunity now for not only France but also as Europe to really coming back since a short visit. So there's many things going to happen after this high-level meetings, high-level improvement of the environment and climate.
Okay. John Gong, of course, this state visit, as we heard, will include a visit to Guangzhou, which is one of the industrial hubs of China. What do you make of that? I mean, does it signify to us that this is a visit that's more about trade, more about manufacturing, rather than political and diplomatic issues?
Well, I think it's both. Clearly, commerce and investment is a big piece of this visit to China. After all, French companies are very active in the Chinese market, and as Huiyao said, that Guangdong being the most open, the earliest open province, and also I would say the most economically vigorous province in China. It's a good thing that this delegation went to Guangdong, and I'm pretty sure they will find plenty of opportunities of cooperation. I do also want to address the issue of Ukraine. I want to chime in on this conversation a little bit. If we listen carefully to what President Xi said during his talk with Macron, he also said something quite interesting. He said China is willing to work together with France to work towards the peaceful solution in Ukraine, something like that. I'm not quoting his words exactly, but he said something like this. Now, France has the history of being an independent player, active player in terms of mediating a peaceful solution even before the war started. As somebody said that Macron went to Moscow a couple of times. Yes. And I won't be surprised to see that there might be a China-Franco plan, peace plan on the table. That it's coming from a very unique angle. And I think both countries are relatively a distance away from this conflict, and add some credibility to this. Okay. So I think it's a very interesting development. I think that statement of his should be paid more attention to.
Yeah, Anton, I've just got a little bit of time left, but I want to get to this one final point, and that is President Macron wants President Xi to press Russia to comply with international agreements on nuclear proliferation. Russia, of course, has just announced that it does want to deploy nuclear weapons in Belarus. What do you expect to come out of that?
Well, I don't think that much is going to come out of it. First of all, the Russians wouldn't be breaking the non-proliferation treaty. The United States has nuclear weapons in 6 European countries and had for decades. And this is the first time the Russians are moving theirs beyond their borders. Is this going to contribute to world peace and stability in Europe? Absolutely not. I don't think it's a very good decision. But is it illegal? No, it isn't. But here's what the Russians may do, and here's where the Chinese could come in as mediators. In exchange for the Russians not deploying, there may be an agreement with the Americans removing some of theirs, at least from countries that are the closest to Russia. Germany would be one. Now, whether that actually happens, given the fraught atmosphere around Ukraine, I don't know, but that would be the first likely compromise. But we'll see if it actually happens.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's all the time we have. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thank you for watching.
Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point.